Imagine, if you will, living in a place where the government decides to spend, millions of rupees specifically to quote-unquote help you.
Right, which sounds fantastic on paper.
Exactly. You'd expect better infrastructure, maybe some agricultural support, right? A boost to your daily
You
survival.
definitely hope so, yeah.
But the end result of this massive, well-intentioned intervention is that you are left entirely destitute. Not just ignored, but actively stripped of the only safety nets and assets you ever had.
It sounds like a dark comedy, honestly.
Yeah.
You anticipate that a state intervention, especially one with millions in funding, would bring relief. Or at the very absolute minimum, a marginal improvement to a community's baseline.
Totally.
Instead, the bureaucratic cure comes in and it completely eradicates the patient's livelihood.
And that dark comedy is the exact reality we are getting into today. Welcome to this deep dive.
Glad to be here.
The mission for this conversation is to explore the landmark reporting of P. Sainath in his book, Everybody Loves Good Drought. We have his incredibly detailed fieldwork from India's poorest districts as our main source today.
And it is a tough but really necessary read.
It really is. But we are moving way beyond the staggering, kind of numbing statistics of poverty that usually dominate these conversations. We want to look at the actual mechanisms.
Right, the how and the why.
Exactly.
Okay.
We want to understand the absurd, tragic, and sometimes darkly comical ways that top-down policies and development actually play out on the ground, specifically for Adivasi or tribal and Dalit communities.
Looking at those mechanics is just so crucial because if you just treat poverty as a static event or, I don't know, a set of sad numbers on a spreadsheet, you miss the machinery that creates it.
Yeah, the gears turning behind the scenes.
Exactly. Sainath's fieldwork forces you to examine the severe disconnect between planners sitting in an air-conditioned office in the capital and the lived reality of the people they are supposedly planning for. We are looking at systems that operate with their own rigid internal logic, which is somehow completely detached from actual human consequences.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because the sheer absurdity of top-down development is best understood through specific, almost unbelievable cases.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's start with the Samanwita Dairy Project in the Nuapada district of Orissa. The government, partnering with various agencies and banks, decides they're going to bless the locals with a miracle cow.
Right, the famous miracle cow.
Yep. The grand plan is to create a highly productive, pure, crossbred line using imported Jersey cow semen.
And, I mean, if you were sitting in a boardroom analyzing agricultural economics, you can see the theoretical logic there.
Just on a whiteboard, it looks great.
Right. A Jersey crossbreed yields a significantly higher volume of milk. Higher milk yields should translate to higher income for the farmers, which then equals poverty reduction. It is a textbook solution.
But the textbook doesn't account for reality. To ensure the absolute purity of this new crossbred line, the project authorities realized they couldn't have local bulls wandering around.
Yeah, this part is it's wild.
It is. So they systematically castrated all the local courier bulls. They completely wiped out the indigenous studs so they couldn't mate with the cows.
Unbelievable.
And the result of this 2 crore rupee project, a decade later, just 8 sickly calves were born.
8 out of a multi-million rupee project.
Just 8. And the local Kariyar bull, which was perfectly adapted to that harsh environment, was driven to near extinction. And the worst part is, in this specific region, cattle aren't just there to produce milk to sell at a market.
No, not at all.
They're the primary insurance policy against drought. When crops fail, peasants sell their resilient local cattle to survive.
What's fascinating here is how clearly this exposes a system designed entirely to fulfill bureaucratic targets rather than to actually address human needs.
Exactly.
The planners had a singular mandate, which was to introduce a high-yield dairy project. They never paused to ask if a milk surplus district actually needed one.
Right, or if the locals even wanted it.
Exactly. They just executed the blueprint. By destroying the Carrera Bowl, they inadvertently destroyed the entire community's drought insurance.
Which is just devastating.
It is. The local block of Kamna lost an estimated 30 lakh rupees a year in cattle wealth because of this intervention. They essentially turned self-sufficient milk producers into milk buyers.
It's like a tech company forcing a mandatory software upgrade on your computer that permanently deletes your entire hard drive.
That is a perfect way to put it.
And the worst part is, the developers get their year-end bonus because the metric for success was simply, push the update, not did the update actually help the user.
Right.
That's exactly what happened here. The project managers literally declared it a success early on just because peasants lined up to participate.
Well, that analogy hits the nail on the head regarding incentives, because the peasants only lined up because the dairy project temporarily offered minimum wage labor.
Oh, to plant the trees around the facility, right?
Yeah, exactly. It was a desperate grab for short-term cash. Once the project officially ended, the wages stopped, the trees died from neglect, the local bulls were gone, and the officials just packed up their briefcases and moved on to hit a target in another district.
It is a staggering level of bureaucratic myopia. And if you think that's just one isolated incident of target chasing, Sainath details the story of Ramdas Korwa.
Oh, the road to nowhere.
Yes. Over in the Sarguja district, the government spent over 17 lakh rupees to build a 3-kilometer road in the name of Pahadi Korwa tribal development.
And for context here, the Padi Koras are a highly marginalized tribe, and the central government allocates massive, massive funds specifically for their welfare.
Right. So they probably put up a giant board for the Pahadi Korwa Marg and the Pahadi Korwa Road.
Right.
But here's the punchline. Ramdas was the absolute only Pahadi Korwa living in that entire village area.
The only one.
The only one.
Huh?
Every other family belonged to a different tribe or caste. This road wasn't connecting a marginalized community. It was just a ghost project.
Yep.
And just to add a layer of pure insult to the injury, this 17 lakh rupee road stopped 2 kilometers short of Ramdas's actual house.
It just perfectly illustrates how development can become a mechanism for extracting state funds for the benefit of contractors rather than, actually delivering aid.
Right, because no one bothered to consult Ramdas.
Exactly. Those funds are essentially sitting in a pot waiting to be claimed. And to get that money released from the treasury, local contractors and officials just have to attach the name of the tribe to a project proposal.
And pouring concrete is the easiest way to spend it.
Right. The easiest way to spend a lot of capital quickly is infrastructure, like a road.
And when Sainath actually goes and talks to him, Ramdas can't even read the official board that boasts his name. He tells the reporter he never wanted a road.
Of course not.
All he wanted was a few thousand rupees to fix his broken well so he could actually farm his land. And furthermore, he desperately needed legal help getting his best agricultural land back, which had been illegally seized by a powerful local landlord.
Yeah, that's the real issue.
He had already paid a bribe to try and get his own land back, but couldn't afford the second bribe the officials demanded.
See, the official target was to spend funds on tribal infrastructure, and pouring concrete for a road ticks that box perfectly. It generates receipts and contractor payouts.
Right, it looks good on paper.
Exactly. Ramdas's actual urgent human problems, a lack of water and an illegal land grab, were completely invisible to the planners. A rigid bureaucratic system cannot process a broken well or a stolen farm.
It doesn't have a standardized form for that.
No, it doesn't. It can only process a 17 lakh rupee road contract.
This brings us to a really critical pivot in the fieldwork. We've talked about the state spending money on absurd, useless projects. But what happens to the basic, essential services?
The stuff people actually need to survive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because the reporting shows that while the state is busy building roads to nowhere, the actual necessary infrastructure like health and education completely collapses.
It just vanishes.
Which forces these marginalized communities to rely on incredibly risky alternatives just to survive.
Or it forces them to rely entirely on their own raw determination. When you view this bureaucracy from the ground up, you realize how fragile a citizen's standing actually is. Even the smallest clerical error becomes an impenetrable, life-altering wall.
Oh man, we have to talk about the typo.
We do.
In Malkangiri, there is a tribe called the Dhrua, spelled D-H-U-R-U-A. But someone, somewhere in the official census or state records in Delhi, spelled it D-H-A-R-U-A, a single vowel change.
And the power of documentation in a modern state just cannot be overstated. If your name or community doesn't match the master ledger legally, you cease to exist.
Exactly. Because of that one spelling mistake, young, educated members of the real Dhrua tribe were suddenly being denied all their constitutionally guaranteed benefits.
It's infuriating.
They were applying for clerical jobs, they desperately needed to pull their families out of poverty, and petty officials were rejecting them, saying, well, there is no Dhrua tribe in our records, we only have Dhrua.
Wow.
They literally created a fictional tribe on paper, and in doing so, legally erased a real one from the safety net.
It highlights a profound asymmetry of power. The state demands official documentation to prove your identity, But the state holds a monopoly on creating and altering that documentation.
Right.
If a board clerk makes a spelling error, an impoverished tribal youth does not have the institutional leverage or the funds to hire a lawyer to force a correction. They are simply denied their rights.
And this withdrawal of state responsibility gets genuinely terrifying when you look at public health. The fieldwork notes that in the early 90s, there were massive budget cuts to essential services, like a 43% cut to the National Malaria Eradication Program.
Massive cuts.
The public health centers are abandoned. They said there were no doctors, no medicines, no staff, and into this vacuum stepped the quacks.
Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does a health crisis. When the state abandons its post, desperate people facing life-threatening illnesses will turn to anyone offering a cure, regardless of their medical qualifications.
Enter Dr. Biswas in Palomar. The man openly admits to the reporter that he gets his medical degrees from institutions he can't even remember the name of.
Which is terrifying.
Right. And his miracle cure for absolutely everything from severe malaria to pregnancy complications is a glucose saline drip. The retail cost of the drip is maybe 28 rupees. Wholesale is 12 rupees.
And what does he charge?
He charges illiterate, desperate patients 150 rupees for it. And he reuses dirty needles. It's essentially a privatized extortion racket masquerading as healthcare.
You have to look at the psychology of it, though. Villagers borrow money they don't have, plunging themselves into debt to pay for this basic infusion of salt water.
Yeah, why they do it?
Because the IV drip looks like modern sophisticated medicine. It has the theater of clinical care. But there's another response to this health vacuum detailed by Sainath, which involves the government's attempt to train traditional healers.
The Bonda doctors. This is one of the most surreal images in the entire deep dive. You have Gobardhan Pujari, a traditional healer.
Right, a Dasari.
Yeah. The government realizes they can't get allopathic doctors from the cities to stay in these remote tribal hills, so their solution is to give traditional healers a first aid box with modern drugs.
It sounds like a joke setup.
It really does. So you have a scene where Gobardhan is treating a patient, he's drinking Mahua wine, an assistant is holding an upside-down chicken, another guy is chanting mantras from a palm leaf.
A whole ritual.
Right. Gobardhan sacrifices the chicken with a knife held between his toes, and then at the very end of this hours-long ritual, he casually reaches into his government-issued first aid box and hands out modern chloroquine tablets for malaria.
I mean, it sounds chaotic, but you have to appreciate the underlying pragmatism of the local officials who initiated this program.
Wait, pragmatism?
Yeah, hear me out. They recognize that the Dasaras hold immense cultural authority in those communities.
Okay, sure.
If the state cannot provide a functioning staffed clinic, piggybacking life-saving anti-malarials onto traditional rituals might actually be the most efficient way to save lives.
That sounds less like pragmatism and more like a total abdication of duty. How can the state legally or ethically justify handing out potent modern drugs alongside animal sacrifice?
Well,
you have a heavily intoxicated healer trying to remember the dosage difference between chloroquine and paracetamol.
it is incredibly risky, I agree. I'm not defending the safety of it, but it speaks to the absolute collapse of state legitimacy in these areas.
That's right.
The government is essentially admitting defeat. They are outsourcing basic survival to a shaman with a plastic box because the formal institutions have completely hollowed out.
We see that exact same hollowing out in education, too. In Ghana, there's a primary school where the state-appointed teachers haven't shown up in years.
Wow.
Yeah, the only quote-unquote student in the building when Sainath visited was a black goat sitting on the windowsill.
You can't make this up.
The teachers literally mark the attendance registers from the comfort of their homes in the city and just collect their salaries.
Instances like that perfectly feed the elite narrative that you often hear in policy circles, which says, well, why spend taxpayer money building schools for the poor? They don't value education anyway. They just drop out to work in the fields.
Here's where it gets really interesting because the reporting completely shatters that narrative. Take the students in Nandapur.
Okay.
It's a residential school for tribal and Dalit kids. The state funding is perpetually delayed, so the facilities are practically non-existent. These kids, who are like 10 to 15 years old, are sleeping on the floor on agricultural gunny sacks in freezing temperatures.
Jeez, that's awful.
And they have no state-provided cook, so they spend 4 to 5 hours every single day just gathering firewood and cooking their own frugal meals of rice and radish.
And despite enduring all of that, the freezing cold, the chronic hunger, the sheer physical exhaustion of just keeping themselves alive, They still attend class.
They do.
They still study for their exams. The desire for education is profound.
Think about the pure willpower it takes for a 12-year-old to do that.
Mm.
These kids are not failing this system. They are succeeding in spite of a system that actively sets them up to fail.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what we were really observing across health and education is the privatization of survival.
The privatization of survival. I like that phrasing.
When the state cuts funding for schools and hospitals, when it removes any oversight or accountability for truant teachers and doctors, the actual need on the ground doesn't magically disappear.
No, people still get sick. Kids still like to learn.
It simply means the burden of survival is shifted entirely onto the shoulders of the poorest citizens. They have to go into debt to pay the quack doctor. They have to sleep on the gunny sacks to learn to read. The state has essentially ripped up its social contract.
Which brings us to the darkest, most inevitable conclusion of this reporting. Because it's bad enough when the state neglects these communities and leaves them to fend for themselves.
But what happens when the state actually does take an active interest in them?
That's when things usually get worse.
Exactly. Because usually when the government looks at these marginalized areas, it means they want the land.
Right. When the bureaucratic machinery looks at resource-rich tribal areas, it rarely sees human beings. It sees raw materials, mineral deposits, and project sites.
Yeah. And the scale of the resulting displacement is staggering. Just to give you an idea, between 1951 and 1990, over 21.6 million people in India were displaced by dams and canals alone.
21.6 million.
Now, consider that tribals make up only about 8% of the national population, yet they account for over 40% of all those displaced.
It's a silent, ongoing epidemic of eviction.
Mm.
And the legal mechanisms used to force people out are incredibly arbitrary. Take the Army firing range in Gumla and Palamau.
Right.
The Army decides it needs a new place to practice heavy artillery fire. Do they commandeer land near an affluent city? Of course not. They do it over tribal villages.
Rationally.
Thousands of Asor and Munda tribals are given a 24-hour notice to literally flee into the jungle.
Yeah.
Artillery shells rain down, destroying their standing crops, sometimes uprooting the forests they rely on.
It's a war zone.
And their official compensation for this trauma and loss of livelihood, 1 rupee and 50 paise.
It is an insulting sum, but they are told this sacrifice is necessary for the national interest.
Ah, right. National interest.
Which is an incredibly powerful legal shield. The concept of eminent domain allows the state to seize property for public use, and you cannot easily challenge quote-unquote national interest in a courtroom, especially if you can't afford a lawyer.
The absolute peak of this displacement absurdity has to be the village of Chikapar in Korput.
Oh.
Imagine being evicted from your home. The psychological and economic trauma of that is massive.
Of course.
Now imagine it happening to your community 3 separate times.
3 times.
3 times.
Yeah.
In the late 60s, Chikapar was evicted to make way for a MiG fighter jet manufacturing project. They received a pittance in compensation years later and were forced to resettle on other land they happened to own nearby.
Okay, so that's one.
Then in 1987, the state knocked on their door again. They were evicted a second time to make way for a dam and a naval depot. So they packed up and moved a third time.
Just unbelievable.
And at the time of the reporting, they were receiving eviction notices again, possibly to clear land for a poultry farm or another military depot.
The ultimate bureaucratic insult here is that the state is now legally labeling these villagers as encroachers.
How does that even work?
Because they've been forcibly moved around so much, and because traditional tribal land ownership isn't always recorded with formal paper deeds in a government registry, the state now claims the land they occupy is government property.
Yeah.
The state steals your land, forces you to move, and then criminalizes you for trespassing on the very land they pushed you onto.
It is infuriating to read. And displacement isn't just about moving physical bodies from point A to point B. Sometimes a community doesn't even have to move an inch to be entirely displaced.
Resource displacement.
Right. Look at the Koya tribe in Alkangiri. Their entire existence, their culture, their local economy is built around the bamboo forests. They make their houses out of it, their tools, even cradles for their babies. They have a deep generational ethic of harvesting it sustainably.
The Koya only take what they need, and they cut the bamboo in a specific way so it regenerates quickly. It's a highly sophisticated, sustainable model of resource management.
But then the government steps in, writes a new forest law, and suddenly tells the Koya, hey, you are banned from using this bamboo. It's now illegal for you to cut it.
While at the same time,
the state turns around and grants massive private paper corporations unchecked access to clear-cut those exact same bamboo forests.
It's wild.
It's literally like someone changing the locks on your own kitchen and then selling all your groceries to a massive corporation for a fraction of the cost, while you just starve outside. As one Koya tribesman heartbreakingly asked the reporter, "Can you ban the bees from the honey?"
That quote perfectly encapsulates the concept of resource displacement. We often think of displacement as bulldozers destroying houses, but here the physical village hasn't moved.
They're still right there.
Instead, their life support system, the commons they relied on, has been legally confiscated and handed to private industry. The impoverishment is just as severe and just as rapid as if they had been physically bulldozed.
Which completely explains the fierce defiance we see in Jalsindi village. Sainath talks to a Balala tribal named Luaria. His village falls right in the submergence zone of a massive dam project on the Narmada River.
So the water is coming.
The water is literally rising. The government offers him a rehabilitation package to move to the neighboring state of Gujarat. And Luaria says, "No, I'm building a new house right here in the submergence zone, and I'm staying."
This raises an important question. Why would a rational person choose drowning over a government relocation package?
Right. It seems crazy at first.
It's not just blind sentimentality or stubbornness. It is a highly rational economic calculation based on factors the state simply refuses to measure. The government's compensation model only accounts for physical land.
And again, that's assuming you even have a paper deed.
Exactly. It completely ignores what economists call common property resources.
Yeah, I couldn't wrap my head around his refusal at first, but then you look at the math. Right now, Luari's forest is his supermarket, his pharmacy, and his bank.
He gets everything he needs right there.
The reporting details how his family gets their firewood, their fodder for livestock, herbs, medicines, and building materials completely for free from the surrounding environment.
Yeah.
If they accepted the package and moved to a barren resettlement plot in Gujarat, they calculated they would have to spend over 800 rupees a month in cash just to buy what they currently forage for free.
Which is a fortune for them.
For a tribal family that barely deals in a cash economy, an 800 rupee monthly overhead means instant, inescapable bankruptcy.
Furthermore, the state's neat little compensation package entirely ignores social capital.
Oh, true.
When Luaria builds his house, his whole clan comes together to help him construct it for free. That community labor is a vital economic asset. If the state fractures that community and scatters individual families across different resettlement sites in Gujarat, that entire social safety net is destroyed forever.
Luari knows that moving means being crushed by a new cash-based system where he has no leverage. So he's taking a desperate gamble.
Building a house as the water rises.
He is building a new structure as a tangible symbol of resistance, hoping he can at least force the bureaucracy to offer a better deal, or perhaps get relocated as an entire community to a nearby forest area instead of a distant desert.
It brings us right back to that imposing phrase, national interest.
Yeah.
The entire framework of top-down development consistently demands that the most marginalized citizens surrender their land, their culture, their social safety nets, and their dignity. And we have to ask, who is actually benefiting from this national interest?
So what does this all mean for you listening? When you look across all this incredible fieldwork, the overarching theme is that poverty in these districts isn't just about a lack of calories or a lack of income.
No, not at all.
It is about a profound, systemic lack of power. It's about being entirely at the mercy of an absurd, unfeeling bureaucratic machine that sees you as a statistic, an obstacle, or an encroacher, but never as a human being.
I think the final thought we have to sit with, the really uncomfortable question that this deep dive forces onto the table, is this. If our accepted definition of development consistently requires the poorest, most vulnerable citizens to sacrifice their homes and their livelihoods just so the urban elite can have more electricity, cheaper paper products, and more military bases.
Right.
Wait, let me rephrase that. At what point does development cease to be progress and just become a modernized, bureaucratic word for conquest?
That is a chilling thought to end on. We started today by asking you to imagine the government spending millions just to leave you destitute. For millions of Indians navigating this bureaucratic maze, that isn't a thought experiment. It is just Tuesday. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into P. Sainath's essential reporting. We invite you to keep questioning the polished narratives you hear around progress, and to always ask who is really paying the price. Catch you next time.